Hi, everyone. Welcome to Smiling Through the Tears. I am so glad that you're joining us tonight. I'm super excited about the podcast tonight. We have a counselor. Her name is Melanie. She and I met while attending the Women's Retreat for Forward Ministry Church in Newton Falls. About a month and a half ago, I was blessed enough to be seated at her table, and while getting to know her, I was fascinated to discover that both she and I share the same passion and desire to help hurting people. As we continued talking, she shared that God laid it on her heart to start a class, a support group to help hurting people. And it was without delay that I knew this was clearly not an accident or a coincidence that she and I were both at the same retreat, sitting at the same table. I knew this was a God-ordained meeting, and tonight she will be sharing more information about how this has all transpired and will define what this is going to look like. So I want to thank you so much, Melanie, for taking time out and sharing this vision that God placed in your heart with all of us. And I know that through this support group, you're going to touch many lives and hearts. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So if you would want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to become a professional counselor.
All right. Well, I think one is I'm just another ordinary person that God has utilized a lot of things in my life to the benefit of others. I guess it started when I was little. I was always pulled into God, and God was part of my life. But I had tragedy in my life. I had situations that were very difficult through my childhood, and then even into my adulthood. Some things had happened to my life. But God had called me into the profession of helping other people, utilizing things that had happened to me for His better good. I remember in going to college and thinking, okay, I'm going to go into psychology, but yet if that doesn't work, then I'll be a math teacher. Well, I aced my first my psychology course, and the course was set. It went from there. So
That's funny. So how long have you been practicing?
Well, I was just trying to do the math. It's probably almost 30 years between when I got my graduate degree. A little bit before that, I was working for Children's Services as an undergrad. And again, when I was at Children's Services as an undergrad, I realized we were just band-aiding family problems and not fixing them. And I really felt like there's a better solution than putting a Band-Aid on family trauma.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw a lot of horrific things in that child protective line of work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How do you build trust with your clients?
I think that comes natural for me. I really don't think, I try to be as authentic as I can, transparent as I can. I have to recognize that my trauma is not their trauma, and it is not my job to share my story, because that's not about me. It's really about them. And for some reason, people open up to me. I've never been able to figure that out in a logical way, but that's a God thing. All Absolutely. I can say, it's a God thing.
I agree. And how do you evaluate the process of your clients?
I think one is to begin with is that trusting, when they start to trust you and when they start sharing their story. So sometimes it's pretty tragic to hear some of the stories, but once they start sharing that, and once they start having some aha moments of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. What you're saying makes sense. And then I think also when they start valuing themselves better, when their self-esteem goes up, when they start utilizing some of the techniques that I've taught them to help them, say, to ground themselves or to help them think through things and make better decisions.
And how have you had some clients for many years, or are they usually in and out of your life?
Most of my career adult life, I've worked in nonprofit organizations. Just recently, I work now for the state. So most of those places, all except for maybe 4 or 5 years, they've been through the job that I was at, more so than recruiting the clients that come in to see me.
Okay. And you said that you work for the state now. And so how do you balance your career and the loss of morals and the godless society that we currently live in, and your Christianity?
And that's an excellent question. And I will say, even though I do work for the state, there are certain boundaries I have to stay within, but I'm allowed to be myself. I'm not a robot. They don't expect me to be a robot. If a client asks me questions, I'm going to answer them honestly and openly, as transparent as I can. So a lot of times they will ask me, well, why are you working here? And I will share that it was a God thing, that, I would have never thought to work where I work now if God hadn't impressed that on my heart. The other thing is I've learned kind of to work around things. So spirituality is a big part of getting healthy, and having a relationship with a higher power means a lot. So when we start talking about healing, I ask them questions about their own spirituality and where they are and what they think their spirituality is, and their impressions, and that opens the door for some good conversation.
What do you think is the most important trait a counselor should have?
That's hard to say. I think because I think part of that is, to me, I feel like it's inbred in my personality. And so we have to be true to ourselves. I think if you are a counselor and you're not focusing and you're not true to yourself, it's going to become apparent, and you're going to sound like a robot or a parrot, as opposed to somebody that really cares. I think being a part of a caring professional, wanting people to heal, seeing that there's hope, giving them hope is a huge thing, because a lot of times they've come when they're broken and they don't have the hope that's needed to get better.
Absolutely. And how do you maintain your own mental health and prevent burnouts?
That's a good question, because throughout my career, have experienced burnout. I've experienced, right now, I think sometimes there's a new term out there, not relatively new. It's called compassion fatigue, where you get tired of caring for people, and not because you're not getting. Most of us come into this professional because we see the need, and we also want to feel like we're making a difference. So if we're not feeling like we make a difference, it's easy to get compassion fatigue and decide that, really, am I making a big difference? And I think part of that is I have to remind myself. I think that's one of the things why I'm changing a little bit of my journey and doing some things on my own time. I love Christian music. That's one of those reasons I rejuvenate with listening to Christian music, just to keep me focused and to allow me. I get part of that is to allow me to have the feelings and allow me to recognize when I feel like it's something's not right, and to do self-care. Self-care is very important in this field, because it's so easy when we give and give and give ourselves to others. If we're not taking care of ourselves, then we're not going to be the most effective therapist out there.
Right. And you talked about changing your journey just a little bit. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what that includes?
Yes, I would love to tell you about that. That's kind of where you and I talked about.
Yes.
One of the things that God put it on my heart, I don't know, several years ago, I think beginning with probably my own personal journey, is that to start a women's support group for those that have experienced trauma. And it could be anything. It could be like, divorce. It could be childhood trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse. It could be domestic violence. It could be witnessing domestic violence. So I feel like there's a big gap with women, that we don't understand the ramifications of how the trauma has affected us, affected our brain, affected the way we respond to things. And we're survivors. And so a lot of times we're just on that survival mode instead of flourishing mode. And I want women to be able to flourish. And so God put this on my heart to start a support group with women. And so we call it Sound Mind Women, based on, I think it's 2 Timothy in the Bible. It's just that God gave us a sound mind, not a spirit of fear, but of a sound mind. And I don't want people to live in fear. I don't want people to feel like they're walking on eggshells. I want them to be a sound mind.
Mm-hmm. I like that name. I think that's a really good name for the support group. And earlier, before we did the podcast, you and I were talking, and I was intrigued by the trauma. You were explaining how trauma works, and if you would like to share that, because I thought it was really interesting, and I think the listeners would really enjoy hearing.
I agree, and I think most of us think, okay, when we see things or we experience things, life goes on, and but our bodies remember it. Our brains remember it. Our brain is an organ, and we have to remember that. We have a heart as an organ, and people treat that as an organ. Our brain is an organ, and so yeah, there's going to things that it's going to be damaged and misfire and those things. And I don't, then that's mental illness, and people think, oh, well, that's just really not mental ill, that's a choice, and it really isn't a choice. And so one of the things, especially long-term trauma, can negatively affect the brain. And one of the things people may notice is they do things without recognizing it. They do things in like, why did I say that? Or why did I go off? Why did I get so angry? What happens is that when our body is a miraculous just being, but God created our body, and it's so marvelous in how intricate He created it. One of the things I think most people know about is the fight or flight system. And when we talk about the fight or flight system, our body, when it perceives danger, it's going to respond. It's going to respond. We can't think. We can't stop it. It does that. And one of the things about trauma is if we get triggered, or if there's something that happens that our body perceives us to be in danger, because, during that trauma, we were in danger and our body was in survival mode. Well, when we think, oh, that happened 5 years ago or 10 years or whenever it happened, and something triggers it, our body then automatically goes into that fight or flight system. So we may freeze, we may flee and run, we may fight, and and that we can become aggressive, we can become frozen, and we don't remember things, and we can't respond because our brain's not clicking in, it just kind of froze. So when we're experiencing that, that's part of how our brain is worked out. The other part that happens is because usually everything is processed. We think things through, we process things. When the fight or flight system kicks in, we can't process. Our body can't think because it's too busy trying to be in that survival mode that we're not able to think clearly. And then maybe, after our body calms down and our breathing starts to relax, then we're like, oh, why didn't I do this? Or why didn't I say that? Or because our brain couldn't physically do that because the fight or flight system decided it was time to take over.
And I had mentioned to you that I think I have experienced trauma and that I think I do the flight or fight mode a lot of times. And I was telling you how there are times when I feel disassociated, like I'm not really here. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't happened for a while, but I used to have that happen quite regularly. And you told me kind of why I was feeling that. You want to share that?
Yeah, and that's that part of that is that your body was freezing. It was freezing, and sometimes when we freeze our body, we can dissociate. Because that's a survival technique. If something traumatic is happening to us, our body, our brain will dissociate just at that moment because it's so overwhelming that it wouldn't be hurtful for us to actually go through those emotions and feelings and that event.
And so can you go through the freeze mode even if you're not experiencing something that was a result of what the trauma was based from? Can it just happen out of nowhere?
It can happen out of nowhere because sometimes, and through counseling and through therapy, you can trace those steps back and figure out, okay, what was the actual trigger? What made me think of that? Whether it was an emotional trigger, whether it was a flashback or a memory, or just something you saw. Mm-hmm. Someone told me a long time ago, and this makes no sense, if somebody had always used their red pen right before they would molest their kids, then that red pen became a visual thing that say, oh, something bad's going to happen. So when the kids would see the red pen, they would immediately go into that fight or flight system because it was a reminder of that. And who would have thought that was, connected? And sometimes our bodies remember. It keeps that score that we may not physically remember it, but with counseling and with thinking things through, we can kind of figure out, well, what was that trigger that time.
And do you think sometimes it's your subconscious mind remembers things that your conscious mind maybe doesn't?
All the time.
Mm-hmm. So what prompted you to want to start this support group?
Again, I think because I've had my own experiences. I see that we're in a world of hurt. I feel like it's an outreach for the church, because we got a lot of women in our church that need that extra support, and I'm not selling this. This is not a counseling group. This is not a therapy group. It is a support group where I can provide psychosocial or psychoeducational information, like I just shared, about how the brain functions. That's just a little picture of exactly what trauma can do to our brain. But I think it's a way to give back. God has given me so much. God has given me grace. God has blessed me, and I need to start giving back. Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And from your experience, what would you say is the root cause of most people's hurt?
I do think that's a great question. I want to say abuse. I want to say neglect. I want to say I do. 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused. 1 in 4 men have been sexually abused, and people don't know. And that stats has not changed in years and years since I started this 30 years ago. I think there's more information now. I think there's more public knowledge, and there's less stigma. But again, I do think that we're hurting people, and society right now is in a situation where it's my needs over everybody else's. So nobody cares what you feel and how you feel, because I'm going to meet my needs first. And so I think there's a lot of, we're just selfish.
We are. And as we were talking earlier, we come into this world selfish.
Right.
We come into the world as babies, crying to be fed, crying to get our diapers changed. Like it's all about me, as babies. And I feel like as a society and as people, we're supposed to emerge from that as we get older, and we start having, we get taught to love other people, care about other people. But somewhere along the line, we're missing that in today's society. And I don't know if it's because parents are both so busy working that their kids are home alone a lot, and then when they are with their parents kind of let a lot of things slide because they feel guilty because they're not with them. I don't know. There's probably a million reasons why.
That's what I think. We're a hurting society, and whether what the root cause is, truly, probably I would say is the fall of the in biblical. When we sinned against God, and Satan was given to roam the world, and so with that, people get hurt and damaged.
And do you think too, this is just a thought I just had talking, do you think because I think a lot of hurts happen in childhood for a lot of people.
I agree.
And I think that maybe our parents are hurt people. We think that they're perfect. They're not. And so you got hurt people trying to raise people, and in the meantime, unintentionally hurting them, and then they have their own hurt. And so it's like, we're all just hurting each other in a cycle, and nobody's really meaning to hurt others, but it just kind of
It's funny that you said that, because you're exactly right. I will share a little bit. When I was, my family had I don't know if it still goes on, but they had fresh air kids, what they called fresh air kids, where in the summer, people from New York City would come into different families to spend a couple weeks, and we had one of those at our house. We had actually a couple of them, but one that I've reconnected with Facebook. She's written two stories, two autobiographies. The first one is about her tragic childhood and the things that happened to her when she lived in New York City. I mean, they're just horrific, and how God has brought her through that. Her second book is exactly that. It's Parents Hurt Children. And that's what she called it. I just got the book. I haven't read it yet. I'm excited. But you're exactly right with that. If we're not totally healed and we're not 100% functioning, we are going to affect our children. And hopefully there's resilience and
forgiveness.
Absolutely forgiveness with that as well.
I know that when I reflect back to my children's childhood, and I tried to learn from my mom's mistakes, even though, of course, every mother tries to do their best, but they fail at times. And so I tried to not model some of the things that I didn't like, but then I still look back and think and see so many things that I wish I would have done differently in ways that I hurt my kids. And I think we all as parents wish we kind of had like a reset button that we could push and just erase those hurts, because there's nothing worse than being a parent and knowing that some of the mistakes that you made impact it in a negative way your child's life. That's the worst feeling.
I agree, and I think I'm with you. I remember distinctly one point in my life where something I neglected my child and something, and I just pushed it off, said it's fine. She had broken her ankle, and I had no clue, and she was walking around, and and she's like, something's wrong. But that was a huge trigger for me, because I'm like, how did I not notice? How did I not take care of it? She's fine, the ankle's fine, all those things, and but you're right. It does pass through and carry through, and we don't want to make those mistakes that our parents made.
And also, real quick, just you're talking about with your daughter, you felt bad about that. And also, I think we as parents also have to give ourselves a little bit of grace too, because we aren't perfect and we don't have it like a manual when we become parents on what to and not to do. We're learning as we do it. And so I think a lot of times we, as mothers especially, I don't know because I'm not a man, but I don't know, like you lay in bed at night and you think of the things that you did wrong and you have so much guilt, and we need to give ourselves grace.
And I'm with you. I remember, because a lot of I ended up single parenting my daughter. My first husband had died when she was 3. So that again is a trauma. And so I remember probably soon after that, my prayer was always be, God, help me be the mother that my daughter needs me to be. And so I rely on that every time I think about what did I do wrong? Is like, no, I know God answered those prayers, and I know I was the mother. I made mistakes, but I was the mother she needed.
And what are some of the most common reasons people come to see you?
And I will say right now, it would be because of drug and alcohol things, because that's kind of what I do. As other places, I think all in all, people come. And drug and alcohol, I would say the same thing. It's because they're hurting. Something happened in their life that made them want to forget. So they turn to drugs or alcohol. I see that over and over again. That's why I feel trauma. So much research in the last 20 years about trauma is phenomenal. Just how we can better treat people that have experienced some type of traumatic event. And trauma, some people may say, well, I wasn't sexually abused, I wasn't physically abused, but if you're perceiving it as something that really disturbed your life and really affected your life in a way that you can't let it go, it's trauma. It doesn't have to be something horrific that we see on the news, or that it's all in our perception.
And I think the reason the drug and alcohol abuse is so bad is because of the overwhelming amount of hurt people. Because the girl that I had on here that was an addict, the thing that she said, the reason I used was because I was hurting so bad. I wanted to numb myself. I wanted to numb the pain. And she said, and that did it. That numbed the pain that I had. And then she got addicted to the drug. And so the pain wasn't there, but then she had the pain of having to get out of the addiction. So it's just a endless cycle of trauma.
It is an endless, because even just an addict itself has trauma just from being an addict.
Yes, absolutely.
So so much goes with that, and it's trauma upon trauma upon trauma, and yeah.
And do you think that there are more hurting people now than there were 15, 20 years ago? Do you see any decline or an increase?
I can't say per se, because again, like I work for the state, but my perception is, I think more people, one, are willing to admit it. Two is, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was like, pull yourself up by your bootstrings and move on with life. Nothing happened, Trauma was first diagnosed in those that were in the military, and it was always just thought as a military disease. And we've come so far from that. So I don't think that there is more trauma. I want to say it's just more recognized, and people are noticing it and know it. And so when women say, well, this happened to me and I was told just move on and forget about it, we're recognizing that wasn't the right answer. That people need they need to be able to understand it, they need to be able to deal with it and heal from it. And I talked about the brain and the fight or flight system. It is healable. Your brain can heal.
And from your experience, if you do have trauma like that and you are like going and getting counseling and seeking help with that, how long does it take a person to usually be able to recover from and heal from that? Does it vary from person to person?
I would say it varies from person to person. It varies on their personality. It varies on their ability to express themselves and to deal with it. Sometimes we've got it so buried so deep that it's hard for to come out, and it usually comes out in layers. And then once you start thinking about this trauma, then you start to remember another trauma. But it's the skills. You can use the skills across the board. So even if it's a different trauma or a new trauma, the skills are the same on how to manage it and how to recognize the triggers and how to think differently and to process it differently.
And you said there's many layers a lot of times. So are there often times that maybe people come to you with one problem and they didn't even remember, they tucked it so deep inside, and then they start recalling different things that happened?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I would say that I've seen that. I've heard the stories. They're coming because of drug or alcohol use, and then when you start unbearing the layers, they'll say, "Well, I remembered this now," and the memories start coming back. Because our body, again, our brain is a phenomenal thing that, if we're not able to deal with it, we forget it or we don't remember it. It's buried so deep. But when our body, we're ready to deal with it, it comes to the surface.
Do you think that's God's protection to protect us maybe from things that we had gone through that maybe our mind can't handle, that God kind of puts that layer of protection? Or do you think it's just something that we do?
No, I think that's God. I do think that's God. And I say that because, and this wasn't real traumatic to me. I remember soon after I got my license, I rolled the car over it. And I was not hurt, but I don't remember it. Physically, my brain was like, I remember before and after, but I do believe that was God saying, you don't need to remember this. It happened. So, and
kind of like when we have children, like once we have a baby, as soon as that baby's out, we're like, we're never doing this again. And then a month later, we're like, oh, they're so cute. I'm going to have at least one more. You forget the pain.
Right.
You literally forget how horrible it was.
And that's God, because he wants us to
be fruitful and multiply.
Absolutely. You said the words.
So I think you answered my next question, which was, do you think it's more accepted by society to seek help when needed now than it was years ago? And you said absolutely that people aren't embarrassed or ashamed anymore. It's more accepted to be like, I have had trauma and I need help with this.
And I agree. And it might be generational. I mean, maybe the older you are, the more ashamed you are. I think before a lot of it came with a shame because women were like, no, you did that for yourself. It's how you dressed, it's how you talked, and no, none of that is true. Exactly. But I think that generation probably still has some of those stigmas, but I think that the younger and younger generation are more and more seeing it as a brain illness, not like somebody that's just crazy or choosing to act crazy. They're seeing it as it's just something beyond their ability to control at that time. With counseling and everything, you can bring that into control, but not initially.
And what are you hoping to accomplish with Sound Mind Support Group? What's your greatest
accomplishment? Is to provide a safe environment for people to share. In AA, NA, it's just you're only a secret, only as sick as your secrets. And then I just read in the Bible today, it talked about bringing what's in darkness into light. And I think when we bring the stuff that we have, our guilt and our shame, the things that we don't want to talk about, but when we bring them into light, it gives them no power. And not giving them power enables us to be more powerful. And so I think that's one of the things is I want that avenue. I want people to feel safe. I want people to understand the trauma, the psychoeducation that goes with understanding of how our brain works and how sometimes our responses are literally that. It's a response not because we had control over it, but because our brain, the amygdala, the fight or flight system took over and we had no control over that. And so we don't have to feel guilty about that now. There's ways to fix it. So we don't go out into rages and we don't freeze and then we feel like an idiot afterwards, those kind of things. So I think that, and there was something else I was going to say and I forgot.
That's okay. It might come to you in a minute. So is this available and open to anyone, or is it just for women? And if it's for women, is it for women of any age?
It is for women. I would want it to be for adults because I think sometimes it'll be overwhelming and we might re-traumatize a child if they came into that, or even a teenager. And not that another support group for that age group could work, but women's, once you're done with school and out, we have different needs, we have different concerns. So I'm looking at women 18 and older. It's available for anybody.
So you don't have to attend Forward Ministries to attend?
No, no, no. Now, I would caution, and I don't see this happening, and if it happens, we'll figure something out, we want a smaller group, because the more people you have there, the less you get to talk and the less of a support it feels. But that doesn't mean you can't come. I mean, we'll just figure something out. Whether it has to be twice a week or something like that. It's going to be a start, and you don't have to come every week. But I think the more you come, the safer you'll feel, and the more you'll be, your defenses will come down, and you'll be able to talk about those things that you really, for whatever reasons, embarrassed, ashamed, or maybe someone threatened you and said, don't you share. I mean, I remember hearing stories, if I told somebody, Daddy sexually abused me, they were going to kill my dog. Well, those are the secrets that hurt us. And this will give you that safe environment to talk about those things.
And do you think that the women will feel safe and learn to trust one another in the group setting?
That's my hope. That's my goal, really, is just to provide a safe and non-judgmental environment to be able to share about their traumas, and to share how there may be. I remember, because I myself was diagnosed with PTSD, and I would lash out at my husband, and I'm like, where did this come from? And I was embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, afterwards.
Talk that. Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did I just do?
Yeah, I've been there. When will you be launching your first support group?
So we start on Monday, June 17th at 6:30 at Forward Church in Newton Falls.
Okay. And can you put that in your GPS and the address will pop up, or do you know the address?
I don't know the address, but I believe if you put it in your GPS, it will pop up. It's either Forward Ministries or Forward Church.
Okay. And how important do you think adding God into the equation is to have complete healing?
Well, and that's why I'm doing this, because I think without God, you can't have complete healing. You can't have that hope and the safety and security of knowing that you are whole and that you are loved and you are chosen. That all comes from God. And to feel secure as a woman, we need God. Yes. We need God for the ultimate healing.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And I often wonder how people that don't have God get through the traumatic things that they go through in their life, because I truly could not have gone through a lot of this stuff without him.
And I agree. And I've seen people struggle in work and other places when they're struggling with their Christianity or their spirituality. And that's when we have those talks. And I encourage them to reach out and look into that, because we need a higher power. We need a God that heals. We need a God that chooses us and loves us and know that we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yes. And that even if nobody else sees our value, that we are so valuable to God. And I always try to emphasize to people that I talk to that if God was willing to lay down his life and die, and not just die a death, but a gruesome, horrific death for you, and if it was just you, he would have done that, you must be so valuable.
Oh, absolutely.
So just remember your value, no matter who you are or where you came from or what trauma you went through, you are valuable to God. And so is there anything that else that you'd like to add that maybe I didn't ask you or that you think is important?
You asked a lot of questions, and my brain is like, okay. I think you got it. I really think, and I just want to shout out to all those people out there. You just know that how much you're loved, how much you're cared for, and that there is a God who loves you and wants your life not just to survive, but to thrive.
Absolutely. And the good thing about God's love is it's not like human love. It's unconditional.
Absolutely.
So no matter what, he loves you unconditionally. And it's sometimes hard to even imagine that somebody could have that kind of love for you. It really is. Like, it's hard to, especially if you come from a home maybe where you weren't loved unconditionally, then it's very difficult to really comprehend that.
Yes, it's almost unimaginable, but there is that unconditional. And once you grasp onto that, your life is forever changed.
It really is. It really is. Well, Melanie, thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for starting your support group sound mind. I think it's going to be incredible. I think you're going to do an incredible job. And I think you're going to inspire so many people. And I think you're going to help heal so many hearts with the information that you are going to provide to them, and the love that you're going to share with them, and giving them that safe place to go to be able to talk through their traumas and have somebody like you to be able to lean on. So thank you so much for what you're doing. It's amazing.
This is God. This is a God thing, and God, yeah, you know, God turns tragedy into miracles, and that's what He's doing.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, and I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us tonight. And I know that life can be hard and you can face all kinds of difficulties and all kinds of trauma. But in the midst of that, always remember to keep smiling through the tears, and God's always got your back. Thank you and have a great night.